Hi, this is Laura Ginsberg from the Vermont Agency of Agriculture. We're making a few changes to the Vermont COVID-19 Agriculture Assistance Program, VCAP. VCAP provides grants to agricultural businesses and organizations that have losses or expenses due to the COVID-19 pandemic. These grants are funded by federal coronavirus relief funds. On October 2nd, Governor Scott signed Act 154, which includes the changes we're making now. Here are the 5 most important things to know. First, the deadline for the dairy assistance and agriculture and working lands applications has been extended to November 15th, 2020. Second, eligible applicants with a net business profit between March and August 2020 are not disqualified from the agriculture and working lands application. Third, sole proprietors are now eligible for the agriculture and working lands application. Fourth, we're launching a VCAP farmers market application for farmers markets with annual gross sales of less than $10,000. Farmers markets can receive up to $2,000 through this application. Fifth, we're working with the Agency of Education to launch a farm to school application for eligible schools and childcare providers. Farm to school programs can receive up to $10,000. In addition to these changes, a business may now apply for more than one state grant funded by coronavirus relief funds, but not for the same purpose as another grant or to cover the same losses or costs. Right now, we're making changes to our system, so the dairy assistance and agriculture and working land applications are currently suspended. The system will reopen later this month. If you submitted a VCAP application by the initial deadline of October 1st, don't worry. Your application is in line to be reviewed. You'll hear from us via email if your application needs more information or is ready to be awarded. So thanks again, everybody, for joining for the webinar today. We did have a number of questions submitted about current applications, application changes, how to handle the application. So I'm just going to work my way through those questions. And again, remember to pop any questions you have into the chat box. We are joined here with a couple of other staffers from the Development Division at the Agency of Agriculture, Christina Sweet, Lynn-Ellen Schmoller, and Diana Ferguson, all of whom are assisting today in monitoring the chat, taking questions, and making sure that we are getting everything answered that we can. So the first round of questions I'm going to focus on is for people who have submitted prior to October 1st. So this is if you have submitted an application prior to the original October 1st deadline. So generally, for the agriculture and working lands application, we had a question, do I need a profit and loss statement for each month of 2019-2020 if I'm only applying for the other economic harm section, otherwise known as additional expenses, to become COVID-19 compliant? So if you're only applying for other expenses and not revenue loss, you do not need to upload profit and loss statements. If you are applying or claiming any revenue reduction, you must provide the full year 2019 and year-to-date profit and loss statements by month in order for your application to be considered. The person who asked the original question had a follow-up question where there was only 1 month where they took a loss to COVID-19 shutdown for an event. And they said that their application was rejected. We're not rejecting applications, we're marking them as incomplete because they wanted a complete year of profit and loss statements. So even if you are only showing 1 month of revenue decline, any claims for revenue reduction must be verified with the profit and loss statements, as I described a minute ago. So please do know that if you're claiming revenue loss, you must provide the profit and loss statements. And then we've got another question. If my application was complete prior to October 1, is there anything additional I need to do? Nope, you are all set. We had 229 applications submitted, and we have a team of first level reviewers that are working their way through them. the agriculture and working lands applications can be complex and complicated based on what the business is applying for. And so it is taking some time to get through all of those. Right now, we have worked through, there's roughly 80 that have yet to be reviewed. And so we're working through those in the order in which they were submitted. It's in the queue for review. And if any changes are needed, you'll receive an incomplete notification with instructions on what to do in order to finalize your application. When do we expect Ag and Working Lands grants to be approved? The applications are being reviewed in the order they were received, and processing time depends really critically on the number of errors in the application, how quickly the applicant resubmits, and if they have corrected all of the errors. So we can't approve an application until it is correct and complete. And so that time sometimes is a day because the original submission is correct and complete. And sometimes it's 3 weeks or more, depending on how many times we have to go back and forth and get clarity. And then the final question here is, when do you expect agriculture and working lands grants to be awarded? So once an application is approved, they move through to payment weekly. So it generally takes between 7 and 14 days to receive a paper check in the mail. So that's how that process is working. For those who have submitted dairy applications prior to the October 1st deadline, the next set of questions are specifically in regards to dairy. If you have, so a dairy farmer asked, if you max out the amount paid in round 1, are you eligible to apply for round 2? And the short answer to that is no. Dairy farmers have a capped award based on the farm size, whether you're a small farm, a medium farm, a large farm, or a certified small farm, and you are only eligible to receive up to your cap via the VCAP Dairy Grant Program. There are some additional questions about other enterprises that a farm does that I'll address here in just a minute. There's another question about from a person who submitted their application last minute, which they recognize, and they also recognize that it may not have been complete and correct, or not that it was incorrect, but it wasn't necessarily complete to realize all of their losses. So the answer to that is, if you submitted an application in order to get it in by the deadline, we're hoping that you did your best to provide all of the information that we are asking for. For dairy applicants only, they receive a supplemental application. So there's the first application, and then the law specifically says that dairy applicants can file a supplemental or secondary application. So if your original application does not reach your award cap, you will be able to submit a supplementary application to claim the additional losses or expenses not captured in that first application. Our real preference is to work with the applicant to get their submitted application to the point of incomplete status, so that we can provide the award and then use the supplemental application for additions. And Roberta, this was a question from you, and I think you just joined. I would ask that you contact me directly to discuss your specific situation, because I know that we were communicating prior to the deadline. So we can certainly talk more offline here, but I did want to address that question generally because we have others in that position where they submitted an application to get it in by the deadline of 8 a.m. on October 1st. And they may have left out some things because they just couldn't get the documentation together. So remember, there is a supplemental application. Another dairy farmer asked, the initial application included losses from milk and maple because at that time we were only allowed one application per EIN number. If we reach the grant cap based on milk losses, can I now apply for a working lands grant for the maple losses? This is a great question and one that we have addressed with a number of dairy farm applicants. If you are claiming any non-dairy farm claims on your dairy application, so if in this case, it would be the maple claims, if they appear on your dairy application, you will not be able to claim them under the Agriculture and Working Lands Grant. that needs to be it needs to be a different claim than what you were asking for under the first grant award. So in many cases, this is only the dairy losses. We have had some dairy farmers reach their cap and then with just milk losses and have included other enterprises or maybe something else from their dairy that they don't feel was covered. But in order to be fair to the number of applicants that are out there, dairy farmers are not able to include any losses added on their dairy application to the Agriculture and Working Lands grant application. So just be aware there that if it appears there, it cannot also appear on the Ag and Working Lands grant. And we're double checking all the dairy applicants that come in. We are double checking to see what appeared on their dairy application, and we'll provide guidance on how to best move forward. And sometimes that is dependent on the farm specifically. We may have had communication prior to this understanding, and so there may be an opportunity where we just need to do some follow-up communication so that everybody understands what can be claimed. Then there's another question from a dairy farmer. If we reach the initial grant cap based on the first few months of milk losses, can we submit another application to cover the additional losses, or is $56,000 still the cap for medium farms? So the original cap is still in place. If you received an award for $56,000 as an MFO, a medium farm operation, you cannot claim any additional dairy losses on any VCAP grant application. Essentially, that is the award that the legislature set out for that scale of dairy business. It's the same with the certified small farms, and large farms. Once they reach their cap, they are not eligible to submit either a supplemental application or an Ag and Working Lands program application for dairy losses. So I'm going to go to potential applicants. So now these are questions for people who have not yet submitted an application and how to approach their business questions. So the first question is, would loss of sales due to crops unable to be harvested and maintained due to COVID-related issues count as losses? And the answer to that is yes. If you sold crops in 2019, this would appear on your revenue loss table. If you did not sell these crops in 2019, you have to show some sort of either forward contract or sales agreement or some other proof that these items were going to be saleable and you are unable to now sell them. So that is there's a distinction there. The question did not specifically state if the crops have been grown in 2019, but if they had and you're unable to sell them in 2020, then that would appear as revenue loss. So put that in the revenue loss table via your profit and loss statements and not as other economic harm. We had another question, what is my farm ID? And so the Agriculture and Working Lands application does ask applicants for a Vermont employer identification number. Many businesses do not have a Vermont employer identification number. Do not put in your Social Security number, your federal employer identification number. Do not put anything in that field when you register. There's an option there to either add a business or I cannot find my business, depending on which screen you are on. And then you'll fill in the fields as required using the new pop-up screen that shows up. This has stumbled up a lot of people because they do not have employer identification number. So I just want to say that again, that field is not required. You have the ability to add the information for your specific business using the tax identification numbers that you use on your federal and state tax returns. Do not put anything else in that box because you won't be able to proceed with your application and it will be very confusing. So use the option to add a business or the option that says I cannot find my business, and proceed by answering those questions. The next question is, will farmers who have already applied for Working Lands funding be able to reapply or amend their initial application? That's a great question. So for those who have already applied and submitted an application, you will not be able to reapply for this program. You're only allowed one grant per program. If the concern is about adding revenue loss for October, we can have that conversation individually with the specific business. And the reason I say that is that many people are approaching this application worried about if they're going to reach their cap. And I want to say and just clarify that of the applications that have been reviewed and approved, which is about 70 at this point, 80% of those have capped out, and 100% of all other requests are being funded. So if an applicant feels like in order to meet their cap, they have to include revenue loss for October, that should be a discussion with myself or the other agency reviewers, just to make sure that it will actually benefit the applicant. Because in order to do that, they will have to make a call about their own tolerance for risk, because they will have to withdraw their submitted application and submit a new application under the new template that is not released yet. Otherwise, there is no way to upload the revenue loss for October. So I just want to be clear that really is an individual business conversation that we should have. But really, at this point, there's not many people who would benefit from going down that route. The next question is about from somebody who raises sheep for wool, and they had planned on increasing the number of events they were doing this year in which to vend and sell their product. They had planned on making a certain dollar amount at these events and markets. They only attended a limited number of markets this year and feel like the revenue loss will be difficult to calculate. And also they invested in processing the wool and then lost all the markets. So I think that situation may apply to other people who are planning on scaling up their business this year and then were unable to go to the events or to reach the markets that they had thought they were. And I just want to clarify that we can only pay for actual revenue loss or additional expenses that are verifiable either by comparison to 2019 sales or with invoices or receipts of things that you have purchased as a direct response to the pandemic. So this person in particular may be able to reach their cap just through claiming revenue losses compared to 2019. I think it's a good thing to do just to start working through the application and see. You can also take a look at your profit and loss statements to get a sense of how much you made in 2019 versus how much you made in 2020, and it may be that you have reached your cap just with that difference. We had a question about if there's any grant money available for technical assistance with online marketing. So we cannot forward pay for expenses. If you have paid for marketing services as a response to the pandemic, you can claim those expenses in the VCAP application. The agency does also offer competitive grant funding for those kinds of projects through a state appropriation via the Working Lands Enterprise Initiative. That will be released later this fall. But as far as the COVID relief funds, the federal dollars, we can only pay for things that you've actually already expensed. So if you go ahead in the next couple of weeks and you acquire the services and pay for online marketing, then you can include that in your application that you submit. The next question is from a hemp farmer wondering if they are eligible to receive these relief funds. The answer to that is yes. If you grow hemp, you would apply as an agriculture business as a farmer. So that is certainly an eligible activity there. And then sort of a general question: what are the mandatory requirements to be eligible to receive these relief funds? And I'll go back to one of the posts that we put out a little bit ago and the information that we provide online. There are certain things that you are required to do in order to access these funds. So you must have verifiable revenue losses or additional expenses as a direct result of the pandemic. You must provide your 2019 or most recently filed federal and state tax returns. And if claiming revenue loss, provide a full year 2019 and year-to-date profit and loss statement by month. So those are the requirements. If you are claiming other economic harm items like the purchase of personal protective equipment or marketing shift, you have to include invoices that show that you have paid for that item. It can't be a vendor summary from QuickBooks. It cannot be a quote. It cannot be a screenshot of a website showing how much a product costs. It has to be the actual proof of payment, which could be a canceled check, an invoice, a screenshot of your Amazon account saying that you've been charged. There's a number of ways to verify payment, but it does have to be verifiable proof of payment. Then the next question is, will all eligible applicants receive relief funds, and how much will we receive? So for the Agriculture and Working Lands program, these funds are available first come, first serve. For dairy, all dairy farms in the state, the way that those award levels were calculated and the way that the appropriation was decided by the legislature was that every known farm or processor could reach their cap and we would have enough funding. In the Agriculture and Working Lands space, we have $8.5 million to grant out. We have approved 71 applications for $1.6 million so far, and 229 total applications were submitted by the original deadline. So you can do the math there that there will most likely still be funds available once we get through the 229 total submitted applications. But it is imperative that if you want to have access to funding that you submit as soon as possible when the application reopens and not wait until the deadline. Awards are based on business revenues as verified in your tax return and cap out at various levels. So there are ranges, so $10,000 to $24,999. That business scale is eligible for up to $2,500. And so that information is available on our VCAP Ag and Working Lands webpage. It goes through and details the caps for the various revenue categories for the businesses as you will select in the application. Then the last question here is, how are expenses defined as a different purpose to be eligible for relief from multiple CRF funded grants? Example, ACCD and VCAP Dairy, or VCAP Dairy and VCAP Ag and Working Lands. Can you give a few examples of same purpose and different purpose expenses? That's a great question because as we know, the legislature has now opened up the opportunity for people to be eligible for and receive multiple CRF funded grants. And the Agency of Agriculture has taken the position that if a business has applied for ACCD, Agency of Commerce and Community Development, or forestry grants and has received that funding, those funds are 100% revenue based, which means you are not eligible to apply for revenue losses in our VCAP programs. You can apply for other economic harm expenses, however, such as personal protective equipment, marketing expenses, implementing new practices for consumers. If a dairy farmer applied under the VCAP Dairy application and now wants to apply under the Ag and Working Lands application, they cannot include any dairy-related expenses or lost revenues. So you cannot include additional months of milk loss. You cannot include losses directly as they relate to your dairy farm. But you can claim items from other enterprises, including things like sales of maple, pumpkins, farm camp. There's a number of different things that dairy farms do as a diversified enterprise that they may not have claimed in their dairy application. And the key here is that the loss or additional expense cannot appear on their dairy application. So I just want to make that really clear that in order for it to be eligible through the Ag and Working Lands program, it could not appear on the dairy application. Then we've got one final question for forthcoming applications. This is from a dairy farmer, Michael from Willoughby River Farm, and he's just wondering how much you should be eligible for. And Michael, if you are on the call, you've put in a number of specifics to your situation, so I would encourage you to just reach out to me directly so we can discuss how you can submit your application. But again, the question of how much you'll be eligible for was lined out by the legislature, and that information is available on our VCAP dairy website. And it is based on the farm size that you are registered with our water quality division. So it'll either be small farm, certified small farm, medium farm, or large farm operation. They each have a cap in which you are eligible up to a certain level of funding. I just have a few more questions to go through, and then we'll open it up for questions. I see a few people have got their hands up, and there's been a lot of activity in the chat. So we're almost there, and then we'll have about half an hour for questions and answers. All right, so this question is about the period. Let's see, can you provide more clarity around the period covered by the Ag and Working Lands and dairy funding? Does it cover expenses or losses through the fall months? And if so, what type of documentation is needed? So that's a great question, because the new applications will include line items to add October losses. So for the Ag and Working Lands application, revenue losses through October can be claimed, as we're not considering partial month losses. So you'll see a new line appear on the revenue table for October. The same goes for October milk production losses. So many dairy farms out there and service providers are working with dairy farmers in submitting September milk, because the milk checks come almost a full month after the month ends. And so right now we'll be working with farms to get that September milk submitted. So it will be a similar process for submission of October milk. Then my follow-up to that is, if there were revenue generating activities after October and prior to the December 20th date that an applicant can prove cancellation by a third party, they're eligible to claim those losses under other economic harm. An example of this would be a festival that occurs in November. Say it's a holiday festival. It's been canceled by the organizers where the applicant attended and sold items in 2019. They have proof of sales at that event in 2019, and they have proof that the event was canceled by the organizers or potentially by a governor's order. So they have to provide both the proof of cancellation and the proof to verify their sales, and they can claim the sales from 2019 as revenue loss for this year. Additional expenses can only be paid for by the grant program if the applicant has paid for them in full. So you could claim buying, say, personal protective equipment that you may not use now. You may use it later, but if you have paid for it in full, then we can reimburse you for those expenses. The next question is, most farms have unique circumstances related to their losses and/or expenses. Where's the most appropriate place to provide these narratives, and can you provide recommendations around format? So I agree, having reviewed many dozens of applications at this point, I completely agree that every farm situation is very different. If you feel like there needs to be additional, if there needs to be additional document or information provided, you must use one of the other economic harm line items. You have to put in a dollar amount claim, so it'd be like $1 would be great, or 5 cents, just some nominal amount, and upload a Word document narrative explaining the situation. Ideally, the information provided for payment should speak for itself, because that is the only way we can provide payment, is through the verification of revenue loss or additional expenses. So I just want to be really clear here that you can provide 5 pages worth of narrative about why your business is in the situation that it is in. We will still only be able to pay you for the information that you have submitted, either through the revenue loss table or in the other economic harm section that is verifiable. So that is one caveat to providing us with more information, is that while it is appreciated and helps build out the picture, we are only able to pay based on documentable losses or additional expenses. We have a question about if we'll be able to provide a PDF of the complete revised VCAP applications to assist applicants and anybody assisting them in understanding the application and preparing necessary documentation. It would be most helpful if it could be made available as soon as possible, given the short time frame before the new application deadline. So we'll try our best. The application is still in development and may not be available as a PDF before it reopens for application. We are working through getting the application finalized so that we can meet our goal of having it released sooner rather than later. And that takes a lot of time and energy for our staff. So we will try our best to get a PDF version available. And the final question is, it is my understanding that the legislature designated the Joint Fiscal Committee as responsible for making decisions about reallocation reversion of any CRF funds that are not allocated or encumbered by a date in November. What options does VAFM, or the Agency of Agriculture, have to ensure that all the CRF monies originally intended for agriculture food businesses will be awarded to eligible applicants given the change in application deadline to November 15th? So as that question states, the application deadline is November 15th. As of November 1st, 2020, the agency will review all submitted applications to determine what funds are remaining in which pools of funds, and will message to potential applicants of the upcoming deadline. If there are remaining funds, the agency is working on possible proposals for the legislature for grants to continue to support agriculture. Even with the deadline of November 15th, the processing of applications will continue through the end of November and possibly into December, given the timeline and turnaround for applications now. And I would say, ideally, we will expend these funds before November 15th. We know that there is demand. We know that there's need. We are encouraging people to submit their applications complete and correct as early as possible when the application reopens so that they can access funding. And our goal is to run out of money by supporting grants that are going out to the agriculture and working lands businesses. So I think we're all hopeful that there will be no remaining funds, but there is communication about what may happen to those remaining funds if there are any outstanding. So at this point, I know Margaret Taft, you've had your hand up for a long time, so we'll start with your question.
Thank you. When we first applied, we were told that we could only apply under one grant because we had only one EIN number for both our milk and our maple. So I put milk and maple losses on our application, submitted it by the deadline. So if I heard you correctly, you are now saying that if I cap out with my milk losses, we're a medium farm at 56,000. Since I put the maple on my first application, I cannot now put it on my working lands, but it's the state of Vermont that told me to put it there and that I could not put it anywhere else. So I feel like I'm being penalized for doing exactly what I was told to do.
Yes, that's a great question, Margaret. I would say that there was no anticipation of an extension or ability for businesses to be eligible to submit multiple grants. And so the goal of having everybody put all of their losses in one application was that we wanted to make sure that people reach their cap. And now the legislature has changed the way in which people can apply. And we have, in order to ensure that the greatest number of people can access funds, we are not allowing dairy applicants to enter information that was included in their dairy application. So I understand that is frustrating, and that
It's
may be worth,
confusing.
yeah, so maybe this is worth an additional conversation about your specific situation. I know there's a number of other questions here, and I don't want to shortchange other people, but I also
Okay.
want to be able to follow up with you directly. So
This
let's,
might answer my question completely. So we have the one EIN number,
mhm.
medium farm operation. So our cap is 56,000. That's our cap for all grants. Is that the deal? Like,
Nope, that was your cap just for the dairy award. And the legislature did make a specific call out for dairy farmers to be able to submit another application under agriculture and working lands with the same EIN number, which is different than any other business, to receive multiple grants for the same EIN under the first program. So I understand that it's
do you
frustrating and
understand my
confusing.
confusion?
Yeah, I do, and it's definitely things that we have grappled with, and it is confusing. So we can put my email into the chat box. There we go, Lynellen just put it in there. So feel free to send me an email with a little bit more information, and we can certainly work on your situation offline here.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So Laura, we had an earlier question from Kevin, and I think I confirmed for him that his project is going to be a prospective project, but he was asking about, can their farm stand that needs to be winterized in order to serve their customers through the winter get a grant through this application?
Yes, great question. So if you have spent the money to do the project, as that would be considered like a marketing or consumer shift, then those expenses would be eligible for winterizing your farm stand to do longer season sales. But we can only pay for things, we can only provide you a grant for things that you have already paid for. So whether that's lumber or insulation or whatever it happens to be, you'll have to provide the invoices showing proof of payment to complete that project.
I think Jen Miller from NOFA had 3 questions, but Laura, maybe you're reading along in the chat now at this point.
Yeah, I can just scroll through the chat here. So Jen, you asked a question about non-dairy applicants who want to claim decreased revenue. After submitting the full 2019 and 2020 year-to-date profit and loss, do they need to submit monthly profit and loss for every month? Okay, this is a great question. I think this is confusing for a lot of people. So the profit and loss statements, you have 2 lines to submit those. The original application had you put them on the month. So there were some very early applicants that completed things in a different way. The consistent approach now is that you have 1 line for your full year 2019 profit and loss statement and 1 line to enter your 2020 profit and loss statement. Both of those profit and loss statements need to be by month, not full year. So not 1 page with the full year. It needs to be multiple pages or 1 page with multiple columns showing the by month, because what happens is that the applicant enters the number from the line item that is generally indicated by gross revenue. So that would be revenue before cost of goods sold and before expenses. So not your total income, but your gross revenue. That number is entered directly into the revenue table, and they need to match. And so we can only match those up by month if we have a monthly profit and loss statement, but it is 12 months for 2019 year to date. So that would be through September now for 2020. Then let's see, we've got another question from Mariah. Are businesses that received a VCAP grant but have losses, harms beyond their cap award amount also able to apply for relief grants becoming available through the Agency of Commerce and Community Development? Mariah, that's a really good question. I am, while I may appear to be an expert on the agriculture and working lands applications, I am not an expert in the eligibility and criteria for commerce and community development grants. And so I am not able to provide you any information beyond encouraging people to look at that grant program and understand the requirements there. So I apologize that I don't know enough to give you an answer for that. Wendy, hi Wendy from FSA. Some producers may be concerned about potential overlap with CFAP from FSA. Is there some wording for that for the state program on that? So for those who received the CFAP, the coronavirus food assistance program funding, this very much impacts many dairy producers and has some impacts for maple and beef producers and some other specific categories. On the dairy application, they marked the box saying, yes, they did receive CFAP, and then it is automatically taken out of their award. Do not enter the CFAP payment in the duplicative payment box because then you'll be double counting your CFAP payment. For others, say for a maple producer who receives CFAP, they would enter that in the duplicative payment line item. All of this is outlined in detail on our frequently asked questions page about how to handle CFAP payments and awards. So now we've got another question from Jen. Assuming that not all dairy farmers will apply or reach their cap, what's going to happen to the money that is left over in the dairy producer and processor bucket? Will it be added to the non-dairy pool? Yeah, great question, Jen. So the legislature has authorized the Secretary of Agriculture to move up to $2 million from the dairy program into the Agriculture and Working Lands program. We understand and recognize already that we're not going to run out of money in the dairy program, partly because some people have chosen not to apply and many others will not reach their cap, particularly small farms, certified small farms at this point. Many have not reached their cap just on revenue declines alone, but some have reached their cap if they include other economic harm items. 100% of large farms are reaching their caps, and the upper end of the medium farm operations are reaching their cap. So we do understand that there will be funds left over, and the Secretary has the authority to move some money into the Agriculture and Working Lands program. So some of those funds will get moved around. As far as if there's more money left over than that, then there is legislative guidance about what the agency is required to do for those funds. And if at the end of the day on December 20th, there's still funding left over in the pools, and it reverts to the federal treasury unless Congress makes a decision otherwise. Jen's got another question. So the October milk checks will have to be submitted by the end of November. The November 15th deadline is before most will have their October milk check in hand. Yes, agree. We'll use a similar process for those farms that are eligible that have not reached their cap as for what we're doing for September. So they will have to submit their application by November 15th with a placeholder for October, signaling their intent to add that October milk check in. We will send it back to the applicant as incomplete towards the end of November for them to upload and finalize their application with their October milk check, and then we will process those applications. So the way we will do that is all of the applications that are submitted by November 15th, we will calculate the dollar amount if all of those applicants capped out, and we will ensure that there's enough money in the dairy pool of funding to pay 100% of those applications. So there's no worries about running out of money if people are putting in the October milk check line item placeholder. And we can't process that until a little bit later. So I've got one more question from Sarah, and then Andrea, I will get to you here. Sarah says, if a farm got a working lands grant, already approved, got funding, but they did not hit their cap, can they submit again just for the months of September and October? And that is a great question that I feel like I'm blanking on. My sense is that we are allowing people to do one application per program, but they are able to receive more than one CRF award. So previously, if you received an award from forestry, you were ineligible to receive an award from agriculture and working lands. That is no longer the case. You cannot apply for the same thing, but you can receive more than one. And this question is specifically, can you receive more than one award from the same program? I will get clarity on that and we'll post that answer. My sense is that they will not be eligible to submit a secondary award because that was language that was specific in the legislature regarding dairy. All right, Andrea, is your question in the chat or do you want to unmute yourself and ask it?
I can ask it. I did submit
Okay.
it online, but maybe it didn't make it in time or something. So I've gotten this from several people, livestock producers who sold out of product in the spring because of all the demand due to COVID. In some cases, increased their production over this growing season in anticipation of that demand continuing. Then again, because of COVID, are not able to get slaughter dates this fall because of the jam up in the slaughter facilities. So they are now faced with either taking on the cost of feeding those animals over the winter because their slaughter dates are now in like March, or they have to take on the cost of shipping their animals out of state if they can to get slaughtered elsewhere. So my question is, can they, or how can they apply and claim those losses and or expenses in this situation? Do they have to like buy all the winter feed now in order to be able to claim it? Are there any options there?
Yeah, great question, Andrea. And your question did get submitted. I just accidentally scrolled past it. So I apologize for that as I was handling my Word document here. Yeah, so for producers who have purchased more animals in order to meet demand, we've seen this in both the dairy and agriculture and working lands applications. We can reimburse for the purchase of those animals. What we cannot reimburse for are expenses that have not yet been incurred. And so if their slaughter date is now in March, that's not something that we can pay for. If they get them slaughtered, say they have to take them to New York, and say, for example, they used to take them to be processed at Royal Butcher in Royalton, and the mileage was 10 miles for them, and the slaughter fee was $100 per animal. And now they have to take them to New York. They get them slaughtered, say, the end of October. It's 100 miles, and the slaughter fee is $200 an animal. Mm-hmm. They could charge the difference in mileage using the federal reimbursement rate for mileage and the difference in the slaughter fees. We can't forward pay that, so it has to be proof. So they'd have to provide proof of either 2019 slaughter or pre-pandemic slaughter and travel to slaughter facility rates for us to verify that they are now actually having to pay more to have their animals processed. So that is one of the ones that we can pay for. It does require verification of prior expenses.
So can I just ask a clarifying question? So that would mean if someone has been able to secure a slaughter date out of state in this time period, so they could prove that, okay, I've got my slaughter date, this is my contract for what I'm going to pay, this is how the mileage is going to be. They haven't actually paid that amount yet, but they have proof that they're going to be paying that, and even the time frame in which it's going to occur. Is that going to meet the smell test for eligibility?
Nope. Unfortunately, we cannot pay for expenses that have not been incurred, and so it has to be proof of payment.
So they would have to prepay for their slaughter before it occurred.
If that works, I think we have to see verification that the expense has been paid for and is not just a quote or an estimate or a planned expense. It has to actually have happened and hit their books as an expense that is different than prior to pandemic times.
And would that be the same if say they can't get a slaughter date out of state, or they don't want to do that and they're going to keep the animals over the winter and, hold on to their Vermont slaughter date in March or whenever? would they have to buy all their winter feed now in order to be able to show that they had that expense?
Yeah, I think the way that that would be eligible would be if they purchased feed now and compared it to their 2019 purchase feed expense. So we could only pay the difference in what they had purchased in previous years versus what they're paying now. So we can't pay for 100% of it because maybe last year they bought the same amount minus 5 bales. So we have to have something to compare it to. And so that is how we enable expenses to be paid, is either it's clearly a new expense because it's a pandemic related market shift or personal protective equipment, or it is substantially different than what they have paid in prior years.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And we've got a question from Sarah in the chat. Are new farmers first year 2020 eligible for funding? Yes. So the legislature required that businesses be in operation, depending on the bill, prior to February 15th or prior to March 1st. So it would depend on the category there, and they would not be eligible to claim revenue declines because they don't have anything to compare it to from 2019, but they would be eligible for other economic harm items. So if they were planning on selling, for example, say to grocery stores, and actually this has happened where we had a farmer say, I grew X number more tomatoes this year because in the winter I had a confirmation that they provided by email from one of the major cooperative grocery stores in the state saying, we want to buy 10 cases per week of tomatoes from you. Then in March, when they were confirming the sales with that vendor, the vendor then said, nope, we're only going to buy 2 cases a week of tomatoes from you. And so the applicant had proof that they were planning on selling 10 cases a week. Now they have proof that they can only sell 2 cases a week. And so we were able to pay them on the difference in not being able to meet those sales. What is hard about that and what requires some additional verification is that they could have sold those other tomatoes elsewhere. And so they actually had to prove to us that they did not end up growing that particular crop and switch to something else. I don't remember the application in particular, but because they had the canceled contract, they had more in stock. They were planning on growing more, and then they had to switch to something else that was of a lower value. And so we were able to pay them the difference there. So yes, there are ways that new farmers are eligible. It is a little bit different because they will not use the revenue loss table. It's all under the other economic harm section. And I think that's all of the questions in the chat. Do we have anybody else who'd like to ask a question? And all of the questions that were asked today, they will join our online resources. So if there was a question that you were particularly interested in and maybe didn't quite catch the answer, you want to review it again, it will be available online. So we just have a couple minutes left. Last call for questions.
Sarah posted another question.
If a farm did not file taxes last year, are they eligible? Yes, Sarah, they are eligible. We request 2019 or most recently filed taxes. So understanding that many people have filed extensions, we've approved a number of applications that are using 2018 and in some cases 2017 taxes, depending on the business situation. So they do have to be in good standing with Department of Taxes. So that is something. If they didn't file because they're in bad standing, then that would be something that has to be considered, because they are attesting to that being in good standing. So just make sure that that is clear with whoever you're working with that question.
Am I unmuted? I've got a
Yeah.
question.
Yep.
Okay. I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand, so.
That's all right.
So it sounds like for farms that are hoping to do one of the working lands applications who anticipate ongoing higher expenses this fall due to COVID related issues, that they really need to think about this prepaying option of prepaying those expenses before the end of October so that they can be eligible to include those as COVID-related economic harm on that application.
Yeah, and I will just underscore that if you are a livestock operator, for example, and you are having to hold more animals over winter because of unavailability of slaughter dates, we will ask you for your feed costs in 2019 versus your feed costs in 2020, and we'll only be able to pay you the difference. So we can't pay 100% of your feed costs, because the assumption is that there's probably some in prior years in 2019. And so just be prepared to submit the 2019 information versus the 2020 information and claim the difference in the two.
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay.
And
All right.
Laura, can I just do a quick follow-up on that, just to make sure I understood?
Yeah.
So if someone didn't overwinter animals last year because they were able to get them slaughtered in a timely way, but they are having to do that this year, am I right that all of that cost would be eligible because they didn't have it the previous year? It's just a change due to COVID.
Yep. In this case, I would encourage the applicant to provide a narrative, not like a college essay, but a paragraph or a few sentences that explains their situation, saying, in typical years, we don't overwinter animals. 100% of our animals are slaughtered in October. This year, we couldn't get slaughter dates. Just like provide some detail so that the reviewer has the understanding, because we don't know everybody's business, and every business is run differently. So providing that little bit of extra information will be greatly helpful. And if they can show, if they have a profit and loss statement that shows that they had no feed expenses over the winter months, that would be incredibly helpful to then prove, to say, I spent $0 on feed in 2019 and I'm spending $5,000 on feed in 2020 because I cannot get a slaughter date.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. It looks like Margaret, you'll get the last. If that's a new hand up. Margaret Taft.
I don't think I have a new hand up. Did I not take it down?
You didn't, and that's okay. It was
Okay.
just I was getting a warning that you had your hand up, so no worries there.
All right. Thanks for checking.
Yeah. All right, Sarah, you get the last question.
Great. Thanks for answering all my questions. One final question. If a farm needs to scale up due to increased demand because of the pandemic, is this an acceptable expense?
Yes. So they again would have to prove based on, ideally based on 2019, but potentially they could say, we had to hire 4 new people to not only abide by the COVID guidelines for social distancing on the farm, but also to handle the increased demand. That is something that would be eligible for payment. So it would depend on the specific operation and the ways in which they have scaled up. But we have funded some of those claims where there is additional labor or additional packaging to meet new customer demand and more staffing time needed.
How about additional infrastructure?
Yep. So in the case of we've had some CSAs or farm stand type operations apply, and they have claimed that because they're bagging up everybody's shares, they needed more fridge space. And so those things have been deemed eligible because it is a market and consumer shift.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. All right. Thanks, everybody. And stay tuned. We hope to release the application in the coming weeks, and there'll certainly be a press release and more information to come.